Greetings. So it's the uh, the the mention of the story I was talking about with the man who walks off into the desert, not the desert. Well, strangely enough, I have a novel that I have in plan. Another one of those dystopian near future stories already set up where he walks off into the desert. But the one where and what is really a desert? You have a winter wasteland or a desert of sand. It's hot or cold. They're the same kind of extreme, but the opposite ends of that extreme. So, but the old man who goes off into the winter wonderland and lets himself go under a sheet of snow. The the point, I suppose, with that and all the other go away. All the other stories are that well, there's only so many themes that you can have with stories because of the stories have to have some kind of context with human nature because you have plot action, but all that has to have some kind of like nexus, and that's the human being. The human being brings forth the nature of values, and quite often people's actions are based on some kind of value or nullification of a value or an attack of a contrary value. Good and evil is a big thing about that, where you have two opposing sides going after each other, and it's a narratively unnecessary duality that doesn't usually fit in real life. You look at superhero movies based on superhero comic books, which they themselves are based off of ancient mythology, not necessarily directly mythic creatures and mythology as a whole, but the framework, good and evil, characters that are distilled down to essentials, which be identified by wings or fangs or superpowers. So with a lot of these stories, there's let's see, would they be motives? There is a motivation, but you have love, revenge, greed, but still, if you take these variables in plot, you know, the revenge plot, the lover's quarrel plot, the unrequited love plot, there is still there is still a there's still a value structure that's represented, a a an opposing value structure, and then they conflict, and that's one of the biggest things in any kind of story. There has to be a conflict to where you have not necessarily resolution, because so if you have good and evil, they're opposite poles. Would they be equal opposite poles, like one equal value of good against one equal value of evil? And they go at each other, it'd be like the Star Trek antimatter matter thing, where they crash and attack each other in this great conflagration, and then they nullify each other. So if they cancel each other out, what's the point of the story? You've kind of you've gone from 1 plus 1 equals 0, which obviously the new math would say that wouldn't be so wrong. But you run with the notion, all this fuzz, whatever, all the conflicts within a story, you perpetuate the conflict, or you nullify the value structures represented in the conflict. And you can't nullify the values, the opposing values in a conflict by an absolute resolution. So you would want to perpetuate the conflict. So there's not an absolute resolution of the conflict between good and evil, but there's some progress made in the story. So what you can then ascertain that it's not necessarily the resolution between good and evil, but to express certain character traits or certain advances in an idea, or representing a value structure, or expressing some kind of motive or some other resolution of an idea in the context of a greater conflict between good and evil. So good and evil would be kind of the launch pad rather than the actual plot line in a story, but it would be the launch pad for a greater story in context, if that makes any sense. Anyway, but you have a wide variety of kinds of stories that usually indicate some kind of conflict. Whether it's good versus evil or not, there is a conflict. Revenge stories are pretty universal in that there is a value that's been violated, or a standard, and that if not to reset that violation, but to exceed the parameters of that violation by destroying or attacking the violator himself. And that seems kind of... So we'll put this into context. So 8mm, I believe, had Joaquin Phoenix and Nicolas Cage, and it dealt with very base, dark desires, and that there was a murder mystery involved. And the resolution of the movie, so I was disappointed, because you get this idea that there's some grand plot or some noble thing that was going to happen at the resolution of a movie, and it seemed kind of flat. And I was disappointed at the end of the movie, where Nick Cage goes after the killer, realizes, yes, there was a victim, there was a death, there was a murder, there was a crime, and there was a resolution where he went after the person who did the actual act. Now, the real villain obviously would be the person who brought the killer and the victim together, whereas had that innovator of that crime not been present, the killer and the victim might not have gotten together and enacted the crime. Anyway, the resolution of that movie was that he was just a man. There was no grand plot. There's no grand scheme. He didn't grow horns and a forked tongue and a pointy tail with a pitchfork. He wasn't a grand devil. He was just a guy, and a very simple, kind of dumb fellow. And you look at pictures like the the hell's his name? Well, the Green River Killer, and various other serial killers, and the Dahmer thing that's come in as a thing nowadays. Everyone's talking about it on social media. But you look at these fellows; they might be intelligent, but there's not really much there. They're kind of flat. You you don't. It doesn't seem like you see that balls to bones psycho like Andrei Chikatilo, the Russian serial killer. You used to look at his face, and there's something there's something definitely not right in that brain pan. But in the conclusion of 8mm, Nick Cage, it was just a man. And in the conflict of good and evil, perhaps it's not so much the white beard man up in the clouds good and the pitchfork and horns devil under the earth kind of good and evil, but that civilization has worked to refine humanity away from base instincts and impulsive behavior and put people on a path of being able to regulate that character, which everyone has. Everyone's capable of being a serial killer. Everyone is capable. It's not that they're going to, and it's highly unlikely that they are. But the rudimentary characteristics that are in place are there for everyone. And I think there is some insistence that it's a brain chemistry imbalance. What was it? The recently they came across the idea that depression and ADHD were, I can't remember. I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll make a video on that. But this idea that maybe these extreme psychological characteristics that are growing in modern day aren't so much out of chemical imbalances, but out of some kind of psychological stress, and that we are compensating that stress with extreme behavior. And that would suggest that serial killers are just people, that something happened inside the mind that turned certain switches, certain circumstances, certain reactions to stimuli that caused them to go down a certain rabbit hole that other people wouldn't have gone down. And I think that was kind of the implication in 8mm throughout the course of the story, from beginning, middle, and end. You could watch Nick Cage's transformation from being a detective on the straight and narrow, and he's kind of getting influenced and into this underground S&M thing, and he's kind of getting enmeshed into it and caught into it. And you look at certain addictions and obsessions. That's pretty much what it is. Is that certain things take hold of the mind. It's like conspiracy theories. Whether it's true or not, certain things get hooked into the brain, and it just, like a snowball effect, it just piles on and piles on and piles on. Before you know it, you're overcome by this conspiracy theory, or by this compulsion. And maybe that's part of what civilization has done throughout the 4,000 years, was to try to refine human beings from acting out in compulsion. But in regard to good and evil in that context, rather than the pitchfork and the white beard in the clouds, good and evil is more of an imbalance between the individual and society and civilization, where people act beastly and are taken by their baser instincts, and that would be the evil, because of the hell. They're just working too far on the outside of society. The outsider. Because you look at all evil characters in novels and movies and TV shows are always portrayed as the outsider. And that the champion going against this evil is always represented as a police officer or detective, some kind of figure that's respected in society. Good versus evil. That's a universal story idea. It's it's the thread that so many great stories have been played out on. Hmm. It goes in line with my writing. This wasn't what I was planning on talking about. Maybe I should script these out a little more. Then it just sounds like me just reading off a screen, which seems kind of disingenuous. I got plenty of stories and fiction to read off the screen, but I wasn't going to go into that so much. But yeah, just musing on good versus evil and some of the primordial framework that all stories are tethered to. They're kind of like 1 + 1 = 2. That's the bedrock, the foundation of all stories. And when you remove foundations from how stories are built, you kind of lose what the story is all about. But that's for another one. So thank you for watching and have a good evening. Thank you.